historic sites and you see people dressed up, can everyone hear me?
No.
No, okay. My blog is often focused on speaking to the reenactor. Those are the people that dress up in historic clothing, and when you go to a historic site, they dress. Often, in order for them to put together their outfits, they need primary sources. So it's not something that you say, oh look, there's a painting, I'm going to try and make a costume that looks like that. Primary sources are usually things that are found in archaeological digs. Sometimes they're surviving samples left over in old houses, or for instance, inventories are a great reference. So one of those, towards the end, you'll notice one of the things that you find is that local people in this area start including Native American clothing into their wardrobes. Even if they have very fancy wardrobes, they'll still have some Native American items usually around the house. So you'll start to see a mixing that happens over the course of the century. When I was thinking, I just gave a few other presentations. Normally when I do a blog post or a presentation, I pick literally one item and I track it from the beginning to the end. And it wasn't only after I presented this idea to do this here on 2 different wardrobes, I realized how crazy I was. Because when people often do this in like New England, they pick a couple wardrobes and they talk about them. In fact, they got to put together a few wardrobes because the wardrobes are so simple. They're usually just a few suits, just a few outfits, all made out of the same fabric, usually kersey, which is a type of twill. It's a very simple fabric. New Netherlanders and New Yorkers are not like that. We're complicated people. It doesn't matter if you're in a little town out in the countryside, everyone has very complex wardrobes. And one of the interesting things is that they have multiple fabrics, and another item is that we tend to hang on to our clothes. So like whatever we were wearing 10 years ago, it's in a chest someplace. And you see that even with these 2 wardrobes. Aha. So I don't speak Dutch. I actually speak Japanese and a few other languages. But what I do is I start with the inventories, and I use a 17th century dictionary, and I translate out of the Dutch into English. The problem is, going from Dutch to 17th century English is very difficult because England is an island, and they're still very much an agricultural society. So when they see something like Turkish fabric, they're like, what's that? Like they have no idea. Their world is like looking through binoculars. So what you really have to do is you have to translate from Dutch to French, and then back your way and use multiple sources, or Dutch to German. And between all of those sources, you start to see really what these outfits are. So one of the problems I ran into is this, if you go to the Imbroch, it's an old stone house in Kingston. They have the original inventory next to a translation. The problem is that translation's probably 100 years old, and it was done by a guy, and he didn't exactly know what some of the women's things were. And you can tell there was a couple things he was a little surprised at, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. And so one of the problems he, let me see here, ran into is this word, reversible. Verander, it means changeable or reversible, but he put reversible in both of these, but this one it would have been changeable because gross grain is a type of, it's a grained fabric, and anyone that's worn those preppy style headbands, it's made out of like a grained fabric. It's the same thing, but it would have been made out of wool or silk or some sort of combination. I know that's not a changeable fabric, it can't be changed, so it must be a reversible petticoat. This one, however, is silk. Okay, it was a colored black, so it was probably 2 colors, and it can kind of seem blackish in areas. That would have been a changeable silk. But you would never know that unless you knew exactly what these textiles are, and that gross grain was highly coveted in the Netherlands and in Europe in general, but not in England. It was expensive. It was a relatively expensive fabric. But the Dutch took the gallon, which is a type of ship that had about 16 crew members, and they did a Dutch flyboat. And what they did was they expanded the belly to carry twice the load, which meant everything was half the price. And New Netherland and New Yorkers got a lot of these shipments in. So you'll find Turkish mohair and you'll find Turkish fabrics and even Turkish clothing in early New Netherland and New York inventories.
What's rock?
A petticoat, sorry. If you don't know a word, just raise your hand. Sometimes I prefer to stick with the Dutch because the styles are a little different, and we run into this issue with underpants. Dutch had them, the English didn't. And when the English see the Dutch in their underpants, they're like, they're wearing drawers, like from the East, and they're like, no, 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 these are things that go under your pants, not, you know, you don't wear them about. So, we have a slight problem here. Everything's shifted. So, let's see here. I apologize for this. So what happened was, there were supposed to be the Van Markens on this side and the Imbroch on this side. So the Markens, this is their little history here, and Imbroch over here, and then some things that they had similar. So some things that were similar were the years that the inventories were taken. So they were right in the 1660s. Both of them, the Imbrochs, who Rachel, my apologies. Rachel is French Huguenot. Her husband, Gysbert over here, he's technically Dutch, but he's from not the Amsterdam side of the Netherlands, he's from the complete opposite side, over closer to Cologne, Germany. And this actually turns up in his inventory. You'll see some slightly German-esque type of clothing. Whereas the Merkins, Jan and Goertje, Marken, they're very Dutch. Jan is from the side that's Amsterdam. She's actually from Gelderland, which is the complete opposite side. And it's interesting because her inventory progresses over time as wealth increases. Whereas Rachel, who is French Huguenot, she came from a wealthier family. And when we get to her wardrobe, there's this kind of lightness and a little bit more expense. She kind of maintains it even though she's married to a country doctor. There we go. So for the Markens, this is roughly how I would interpret their inventory. The only thing is I would swap him here and him here. That's the only difference. This is actually more of a country outfit, closer to the western side, the opposite side she is, but it is a country outfit, and she's from an area that's so far out in the boonies that I could not find a single painting from that region. So, but to represent more of a country type of person, this is what you would be wearing, multiple layers. If you notice, this is very consistent. When you see these ladies, it's a country style, but if you notice, she has everything. Her arms are covered, she has multiple layers of petticoats, this is an apron, she has an extra petticoat under here. This are two knives in a tube. That's how they were eating in the first half of the century. And it's not that she's poor, just because she's rural doesn't mean she's poor. That sometimes is a mistake. In fact, when you go through these old inventories, almost everyone's clothing is relatively new, no matter how poor they are. As her wealth increases, she actually has a phase that comes in between here, but she ends up here. And the black hood with this is called the tabaard bodice, all this is in her inventory. So she would have been about here when she got married, which would have been about in her 20s. 21 was majority for females, 24 was majority for males. So this is the direction we're going to go in. So her outfits start off with, the only thing old in her inventory that's listed is the borat coat. And they often like to list the fabric that things are made of. Borat is a silk wool blend. What's funny is we think of silk as something that's expensive. This is something working class people wore. That's the amount of wealth that was in the Netherlands. It probably was her best coat. It was actually a loosely woven fabric, so it was actually something that more of a working class person would buy, make a small garment that they could show off. It wouldn't have been tightly woven. But the rest of the outfit would have been made of a very, very tightly woven, go ahead.
So this is really before cotton?
Yes, but I don't get into cotton here. The Dutch start importing massive amounts of cotton into New Netherlands and throughout the area. I have a Spanish cotton petticoat in one of the inventories. So it seems to be that it's first coming in from a Spanish sources, and then
But it's
the
still
Dutch.
later than this, or this cotton coming in?
It's going to start coming in right, I would say right about here. So you're going to start to see it. So like the very next set of inventories, you'll start to see the cotton increasing. Go ahead.
In the previous one, did you tell what the men were wearing?
So he's wearing a vest. Those are breeches or brock stockings. He's wearing, this would be his understocking, which goes all the way up to the knee, and that's a garter. This is an overstocking, and then his shoe.
And the shirt is made of what?
It would have been made of linen, but by the end of the century, you will start seeing cotton shirts. Don't tell New Englanders this. They believe it does not exist in America in the 17th century, but we find it in New York inventories. And it's coming in through the Dutch, the people that own, and French ships, and all the different groups. But it's not coming in through England.
And the coat that he's wearing is what is that?
I actually have a better painting of that further on, so I'll get to that. These wide-brimmed hats were very popular during this time. They're kind of like the musketeer. And this thing he's wearing, the bandolier, he's actually would have a sword hanging from here. I think I stopped counting at some point once I got to like 120 rapiers. I mean, they're exceedingly popular. So rapiers, it was like they were walking around with a rapier and a pistol. That was like the thing. Some women will have pistols also. I haven't found women with rapiers, but I found them with guns. So with her outfit here, this thing, we're going to talk a little bit about stomachers. And sometimes they get translated as stomachers. They're actually horselips, and they're stays. So, but not, these are not the 18th century style of a stay. There's not going to be, it's going to be very rare to ever see a bodice or like a corset. And when we think of these, we think of like either some sort of boning, like a stick or something going down in there, making it tight and sucking it all in. And that's not really the intent for these to do it quite like that. The goal is to provide support. And you can't tell here, but there's a matching doll to this. There's a few dolls from the 17th century in Dutch museums. And they must have thought they were rather cheeky because the other one comes with a cover on top. And being Dutch, they sent me both covered one and it flipped up. And these, they have to wear these coming down because her shirt is open all the way to about here. And it's pulled up and out this way. And they need the partlet to cover everything. They can actually flip those up and nurse a baby without a problem. And they actually get even lower when you're nursing. So this is actually a nursing stay, and this is more of a young woman's stay when it's done in the back. They need to come up the front once you have children. So Marken had a slight problem with their inventory. It was broken into twice. And so it's a little, when it's put into the records, it was not put in order. So it gets a little messy in there, but there's a lot of stuff missing. And that's actually part of the reason why we know what something is, because they'll mention it before it went missing. And then when things went missing, they had to be even more detailed. So if you combine the two, you might see a pair of white drawers or underpants, and then all of a sudden you'll see they were white balzine, which is a type of fabric, underpants. So in the Marken family, Goertje seems to have had working style or country, more rural style clothing. They were wearing, this would have been a little bit more of a rural style bodice. It's a little hard to see, but it actually comes up here and comes over, more like a vest. And then she actually wears it over what's called an undershirt, and then that's over the linen shirt. And then she would have put a coat like this. And you could actually see her red undershirt here and a little bit right there. And then that would complete her outfit. That would be a work outfit. People all along the Hudson here, whether they're German, French, or Dutch, or whatever, They always have work clothes, no matter how wealthy they are, and then like their weekend party, holiday clothes. I have not found anyone that just has nice clothes, I mean, they're nice, they're made of good materials, but they're not like fancy clothes all week long. So the markings are interesting because this particular outfit comes up a few times in a few different inventories. We see it in the markings because they're very, very traditional Dutch, but Rachel does not have these. And one of the impressions you get from Rachel's inventory is that even though she's surrounded by many Dutch or German and other people, there is definitely like a Frenchness about her wardrobe, whereas this one's very, very Dutch. So this particular outfit evolves out of Spanish clothing. And if you notice, these coming down here are box pleats, or they could be pinched, but they're probably box pleats, and they're connected right at the shoulder. If this was undone and she twirled, that whole coat would just like spread around her like that. They never quite do that. And then there's this odd little bodice that comes out like this. If you go into Google and you, instead of clicking on pulling up all the different websites, click on image and type in the name of a Dutch painter, and it will pull up all the images associated with that painter. And it's a nice way to spend an evening. His waistline is raised when they start wearing these. And what happens is, these are called a villager, they're called, or kites. They're called kites because when the women walk around, the thing flies kind of in the back. I put this up because here's one here. It's a short version of a villager, and they're fighting over a pair of breeches. You'll see this a lot in the Netherlands images of women fighting over breeches. And just a side note here, back in the century before, the Spanish were very upset that the Dutchmen were treating their wives so well and giving them so many privileges. He decided that Roman law needed to be implemented, so the new law stated that women were supposed to be subservient to their husbands. And the Dutchmen didn't really like this. They liked their wives making money and, having lives. So they wrote in all these other little laws to undermine, essentially. So they said, they're really not subservient, but we'll just make them minor so they don't lose their last name. So they all keep their last name. They have their own identities. They can take out lines of credit. They can do pretty much anything a guy can. But even the Dutchmen didn't want their wives involved in politics. That was like the one area that they were just not allowed to go. And that might be why there's so many of these images floating around. Notice the guys are just like haggling over fish. So this is the next level of villager. This is the one that I think the Markins probably had. The pleating starts to, it's attached to like a strip of cloth over the back, and then it hangs down. And if you notice in the very next century, the French women start walking around in these like pleated gowns. I wouldn't be surprised if it's from this, because this they come up with this, then there's a generation later, and then that comes back out. So it's sort of like wearing 70s clothes now. You can actually see the strap going across the back. That's almost identical to how to make a sack gown in the same way. This actually comes from in Naples and in Venice. They were wearing this outfit 2 generations before. And so it just sort of, and you can actually see these being worn by the wealthiest early in the century, and then it trickles down the century to the middle class. And this continues to happen over and over again in the Netherlands. It starts with the wealthy, trickles down to the middle class, and then the working class start to adopt this. And when I say working class, I'm like, you wouldn't see the milkmaid in this, but anyone with like a skill would wear this.
What about the collars they're wearing?
Okay, so in New Netherlands, when you're looking at paintings, you can go up to about a decade late, and you will still be well within accuracy, if that makes sense. I mean, what you see is like the Markins is that she has older styles in with her newer ones. So this is probably what she was married in. This is actually something married women would have worn, but not a single woman.
What's it made of, that collar?
The collar, linen. very fine like cambric linen,
And
and it's folded and starched. Yeah, there's an iron that's kind of round, like you would have done the curls for your hair, and it would have pushed down and pushed up and pushed down, and it would have all been done by hand to make these. They get me really
Did they
fancy.
think that was beautiful or helpful or
Oh, that was power.
powerful?
These women were powerful, and they were showing off their power. They're like, these women, these are, I don't remember if this is the ladies that are head of an orphanage, but there's all these like status positions women could have, and they make all the decisions. And they're showing off that they can read. By mid-century, half of all women in the Netherlands could read.
How do you think the pleats are set? Are
They're
they
probably, I think they're like I think they're probably box pleated, side by side.
And it looks like we're seeing the edge.
Yeah,
of the
so
pleat.
what it is like here you can see a little bit of fabric here. And what it is there's one across the top here. She actually has another thing that holds up her collar, holding it up so it's laying on top of that fabric here. And then, so you would have your fabric, you would attach your sleeves, you would flip it over, sew your box pleats on, and then sew it to the fabric, and then flip it back over and sew all the other pieces together.
Now, academic robes would have cartridge pleating.
Okay.
Do you think this is
I've heard
related
people
or
suggest
not?
that it's related, but not to this one, to actually another robe that the Dutch were wearing. So the next evolution is actually this tabaard bodice. She has one, but it's detached. It's not attached to a skirt. There's versions of this with an attached skirt, but she does have both black and white linens. Linen back then came in black, white, or blue. There's linens. And the layering would be underneath also, right about this time when they adopted this bodice, and we're going to get to a frontal picture of it, is when they started wearing drawers, specifically drawers. Dutch women also had breeches underneath their skirts for the winter weather, and it's cute. They matched them to their waistcoats a lot of times. And you think, wow, why are they wearing matching, undies with their waistcoats? And it's because when they go flying across that ice, they want to make sure they're fashionable. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, so what was the most common fabric then? Was it linen? The most common fabric?
The most common fabric for underclothes was linen.
Okay.
The most common fabric for these outer garments was a fabric called serge. They don't use the word serge anymore because it's not fashionable. It's not going to sell the fabric. At some point, they started calling it sports weight suiting. So when you go to join fabrics and you want to find serge, go to the sports weight suiting
So
section.
what is the serge actually made of?
So serge is made out of wool.
Okay.
And the Dutch at one point started making it out of Spanish wool because it was considered the best. Eventually English wool became the best because they crossbred the sheep with the Spanish sheep, so to make it better wool. And the next grade up from serge would be the grosgrain, and the serge has a diagonal line that kind of goes across it in the fabric because it's a twill. And grosgrain has a horizontal. If you have it made in the Netherlands out of wool, it's a very, very good quality, fancy one. If it's made in the Netherlands with mohair from the Levant, that's a little bit more expensive, and those show up in inventories too. Now, if you're really fancy pants, you get the grosgrain. It's shipped in already pre-made from the Middle East, and that also is in inventories, both for sale in stores, and you find it in actually. One of the two inventories actually has a suit made of Turkish mohair.
So that man, is that wool or is that linen or what? The black?
That black one is probably the wool or it's black leather.
Black or leather?
It may be black leather, or it could be wool. But I got a little bit better, larger photos or pictures of them. Go ahead.
What's the object in the lower left photo?
Here? Wait,
No.
here. These?
Yes.
That's a doll.
It's a doll?
Yes, I'm sorry. Like
sticking out.
yeah.
Oh.
It's a rug.
Oh.
So I'm sorry, last weekend, each year I do a talk on underpants and the history of underpants. And it's got a lot of doll images because I could not, as far as I know, there's no surviving 17th century ladies underpants, so the dolls are the only source I have. However, there are 17th century men's underpants. There's almost no difference between the two, except the men wear a cuff at the knee and the ladies wear a drawstring. They were not open drawers in the 17th century. They were Italian style where everything's closed. Just FYI. So this is the tabaard gown. And it's made up of a bodice with a petticoat. Sometimes the petticoat is attached, sometimes it's not. But this is like the height of, it's like, you know, some people refer to it as a pirate gown. There's a few of these in inventories. The Markins have one. Goertje here, the Dutch one. Rachel, who's French, she also has one. And the lady who trades with Native Americans up in Albany, she owns a store up there, she even has one. So, and they only ever have one in their inventories. They're probably the most expensive outfit they own. And believe it or not, while this looks very stiff, it would have been, but all this is it's a layer of pasteboard. It's sort of like having a piece of cardboard sewn into your clothing, and a piece of silk on the inside, a piece of silk on the other side, and that's it. She does not have a bodice or stays on underneath that. So that's completely supported with pasteboard. Pasteboard can be, it's like a, I believe it's sort of like a type of linen that's dipped into like a paste to make it hard, like plaster. And when you wear it over time, the heat would like kind of mold it to you. And these lace up the back. You would actually need a lot of help getting into this. But one of the interesting things is in the 18th century, this kind of looks like it comes down and would be awkward. These actually ride way up. They're only rib cage level. So the entire, you would be completely free to do this. And sometimes you'll even see women leaning in their bodices and things because you can actually see how flexible they are. But by the end of the century, they'll be like, you know, they're stuck because like they start to adopt more of a French style. And we actually see that because the French actually start wearing a more rigid version earlier, faster than the Dutch do.
So the fabric, the black fabric she's wearing is what?
That's silk.
Is what's that?
That'll be silk, yeah.
And the white stuff up on top?
This, I'm betting because it's kind
on
of,
top of hers.
oh, that's a lace linen.
Lace.
Yeah, it probably was just linen, lace. And this petticoat, that ribbing, that's like a lace, there'd probably be like, because it's kind of shiny, it's probably meant to be like a silver or a gold lace. This is, I believe this one is the author of these paintings. And this is a self-portrait.
What is the man wearing?
He's wearing a doublet
Doublet.
with a pair of breeches. These are his stockings, these are his overstockings or boot stockings, and then these are his boots. He's kind of fancy. This is probably Spanish leather. That's like really nice. Mr. Studi and Tara parallels. He actually had a guy shipped in that knew how to do that special. So he liked those. His bandolier with his sword, his wide brimmed hat. He has a linen shirt on, and this, it's like sort of like a ribbons hanging down, and they're just pulled out, and he wanted his there, and some there. They could be anywhere on their clothing. In this specific time period, you'll see them everywhere. You'll even see women wearing bodices, and they'll have this, like an apron or a bib on the front of their bodices or cloaks even. It's very short-lived, that phase of ribbons. Are found in inventories too. Pearls too are being shipped in. They're actually, the pricing of the pearls, I would definitely say anyone that's like a merchant level would definitely have them. If somebody middle class saved up, they could afford them. They were kind of priced about that. Venice started the infant level of producing pearls, culturing pearls, so they were starting to become more affordable. So this is kind of how I imagine the Markins with, she did not have a one-piece tabaard, she had a separate two-piece tabaard. So she would have had her linen, this is just her bodice, and then she had a black, she had a white little kerchiefs, and then she also had a black hood, a silk one. And he had an outfit very similar to this. He's probably holding a pair of leather gloves right there, just mashed up in the stands. Each decade, it was fashionable to hold something in your hand. And it starts off with, I believe, gloves. They move on to a feather, and then they move on to like fans. And once the wealthier start seeing like the middle class copying them, they quick change to the next thing that was fashionable. They tended to get, the Dutch in particular tended to look to Italy for a lot of their fashions. So first it was Spain, then Italy. You will see French fashions floating in, you will see English fashions, but at this time Italy was a popular one. And then what's kind of interesting is the western side of Germany and in through there, they're copying the Dutch. I live in Luxembourg in Europe, and they're copying the Dutch too through this time, and the Belgian era. So a little bit on men's clothing. I realized after I made this that I left out the men completely, so I threw a few slides in. So their outfits are very simple. It's very important when looking for women. When you go from decade to decade, if you want to wear something from a previous decade, it's cool because chances are your mother left you her clothes and you would have worn them. The guys, you don't see that as much. You see the guys are very much peacocky this century. In fact, when I give my talk about the history of underwear, one of the things that you see with the Dutch is kind of interesting. So while women had breeches, the guys had in Rome, they started to wear longer style underwear, and only the wealthy were wearing them. So of course, Dutch guys wanted to wear them because it was fashionable. And they wanted to make sure the ladies knew that they had fancy underpants, so they made sure you saw them. Okay? And what's cute is the ladies go, I really like those, we're gonna appropriate them. So then the ladies have white underpants on that come to their knees. And the guys are like, ah. So it became the thing to wear bright red underpants because the ladies would never go there. And what's interesting is we get an idea of why also this was happening. It was happening for a few reasons, but this painting is literally called Beware of Luxury. So if the average guy had white underpants, that was okay. But for an average guy, they're implying that this is an average couple, average middle-class burger, small burger, not a large one. He's wearing red ones, red silk underpants. And this guy's a very wealthy guy, so he's trying to portray himself like this. And interestingly, Mr. Markin has this outfit in his inventory, but it's not the outfit he's wearing now, it's an old outfit he put into a chest that they found in another room. So but this is, his coat though is in leather. So it's in with brown pants, a pair of red underpants, and then shoes and some other old fancy, but it's like, you could tell it's like, he's like walking around like, I'm great, kind of outfit. This is another jacket that you find in Markin's Markin's inventory. This is probably where the buttons are coming up here, they're a little loose down the middle. It's just the style. These jackets that you see here, these velvet ones, I did not find that velvet jacket. You will see it over and over again in Dutch paintings. I did not find them in these inventories, but they do have jackets. They just didn't mention that they were velvet. Oh, go ahead.
You had go back, one pair of underboots, half red, half white.
Oh, Harlem guys like to wear those. The guys from Harlem in the Netherlands, kind of like we have Harlem down in New York City. It was a thing to wear your clothes half in red and half in white. your undershirts and your underwear.
That means bifurcated?
Yeah,
So one leg
would
would
be And there were special times of year you would actually see them out on the street like that. Like when you see pictures of bakers, and they sort of look like their fly is open, they're wearing a pair of drawers, is what it is. It's just so hot, they're stripping down. It's actually why underpants were invented, because down in Italy, it gets so hot that the Italian guys were rather short linen shirts, and they were working in the field like this, and the priests were like, oh, we have to do something about this. So they mandated, one by one, each province mandated, guys must wear underpants at all times. To shield, as they put it, to shield virgin eyes from the abomination of man. These are some other things too, but we won't go there. There's one cute one.
Sort of the opposite of Islam, where they're covering their men instead of covering their women.
Yes, actually, in Italy it's very important because women are pure no matter how naked they are, but Italian men are always dirty. I happen to be Italian, but I don't think so. I can say that.
What's the next stuff that you have on the table?
This one? So these are shoes, and I have no idea that he's wearing boot stockings with his shoes rather than with boots.
Are those
So
stockings or what?
yeah, there's a type of stocking, but they're boot stockings. They're meant to go over big, giant great boots. They're called great boots. Which, by the way, depending on when you're in New England, are illegal. You would get taxed if you were wearing great boots, and if you were not in the highest level of income brackets.
Why red?
Because it's Dutch. I mean, they love the red. They love red. Also, red dye, well, it's expensive for most people during this time. The Dutch, with their big-bellied ships, were shipping in so much of it. I mean, when you look at inventories, or you go on my blog, like, for instance, lemons and limes and oranges, that's normal life in 17th century New York. Red fabric, mohair shipped in from the Middle East. I mean, they had it all. They really did. I mean, I found a Japanese katana sword in one of the inventories, and they have kimonos. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously not the first decade. I mean, those people were living in hovels. I mean, but like, it really picks up very, very fast by, as they go through the centuries. And this is not just the Dutch. I mean, you're seeing French people like this, you're seeing the Germans like this. It's like definitely shared, a shared lifestyle. So, it can be a little difficult trying to find a photo, a painting for every single bit of this. This is just just a glance. So if you notice, his inventory tends to be white, red, gray, or black. So it's like plain and then this bright red. That's just his inventory. Another guy might have blue as his go-to color, or green, or something like that. The guy's outfits tend to be a little bit more subdued in color because black was expensive. It was an expensive dye. And they had more than one type of black, but the Dutch really liked that true black, and they developed techniques to get the wool to be a true black. Linen, when you see linen aprons in there, they're not usually true black, but when you had a silk one, that could be a true black. And that was very prestigious. That was, the black was like, I have money, I made it, honey, come hither. You can actually see the serge right here. For a wealthier person, that would be their working clothing, and even for a middle-class person, that might be their working clothing and maybe some of the nicer clothing. That would probably be the best fabric for, say, a labor person. But one point I do want to make. People here in the Netherlands and New York, I found contracts, and almost every contract, it always includes board and washing their clothes. And one of the contracts was a week-by-week contract, and his washing was to be done with each of the weeks of the contract. It probably wasn't all his clothing, but all his linens were getting washed regularly. So, and this was a guy who was putting up fencing and like molded wood. So even at that level, they were very clean people. These are just some other items, just to kind of give you a taste of like the variety that you find in these inventories. They're long, very long two I happened to pick, of course, were pretty long. One of the things I thought was cute is this, where is it? Where'd it go? Oh, most inventories have some sort of paintings, but the 4 tin telescopes. Tin. If something's spelled completely odd, it's probably because I kept the original spelling.
What is a golf stick?
That's a golf stick. There's some really cute early stories about golfing, sometimes to the point where they got so mad they clubbed each other over the head and it would work.
What's a woman diapers?
Yeah, there probably would have been more at one point, but yeah. I never find a lot of diapers in inventories. They were a little bit older. They were, I believe, in their probably late 40s, early 50s. So they probably have gone through, and this is just, they'll keep what's still good, if that makes sense.
What's a wooden woman foot stove?
Oh, when you look at the old Dutch paintings, you'll see a lady up with a foot like this on a little wooden box. Inside the box will be a little, like not a ceramic, but like a stoneware bowl with coals. And then they put it in there and then put their foot on it and their feet stay nice and warm. It's kind of like around here, like every woman would have had one kind of thing. So we're going to move on to the other side of things. So Rachel, she's French Huguenot. She's from a wealthy family in Albany, and she moves down to Kingston, and she marries Gysbert. And Gysbert's interesting because I always see references to him being Dutch. But I got a feeling if you went back to his parents or grandparents, he was probably really German. And part of this is that he's not from the Amsterdam side. That's like the cool, awesome side of the Netherlands. He's like from the other side, actually. And never say that to a Netherlander, okay? But there's a section of the Netherlands that comes down, and it's kind of like a peninsula, and it's stuck between Germany and France. And I think that's kind of important when interpreting his inventory. But before we go there, I want to point out a black Turkish roast grain man's suit of clothes. And then he had a cloak of black cloth. That should be laken. Laken's a special fabric. It's very, very thick. It's tightly woven, and then it's brushed. And this is what got them through their winters here. The very thick, nice fabrics kind of thing you want to wrap up in. And they were made from Spanish wool. One note about this, there are very few portraits of middle-class people from France in the 17th century. But the Nan brothers, I believe that's how you spell their name, or not spell it, but pronounce their name. This is one of their paintings. And she's technically wearing the same gown this woman is wearing. This is a tabard also. They just didn't paint in the princess scene there very well. But they tend to be a little stoic in these paintings. But if you notice, the clothing really isn't that far different than the Dutch, especially in northern France. The northern French, they're dealing with two markets, and so they need to be fluid between those, and they have access to both markets. So this is kind of how I imagine Rachel. She's the only inventory I found with cosmetics. She has black and red. They don't mention what they're being used for, but we can kind of guess for the eyebrows and lips and things like that. She is probably a little bit more on the feminine side. She does not have breeches or underpants in her inventory. There's other little things. There's a lot of like more. She has a softer feel to her inventory. So then she has this tabaard. It's actually a complete one. It actually includes a petticoat with her gown. So it probably was the outfit she wore when she got married. I believe she leaves 3 children behind, and they were only married like 10 years, and then she dies. So we actually end up seeing her world when she's about 30 years old.
the velvet made from?
The velvet, it could be made of silk, and I think sometimes it was made of wool.
Silk or wool?
Yeah, I think it was like, it's like a fake wool, or fake velvet. But there is a book, if you guys want to know more about textiles, it's a really great primer. It's called Textiles of America. I really recommend it. They only made a limited run of it. It's a reprint. So if you do, it's something like I think historic museums should also get their hands on. She also has a changeable, it's probably silk, petticoat with green lining. Green lining used to be kind of popular. It must have been a thing in the 1660s. She had a velvet cap, fans, ribbons, lace, lace made out of silver. It's a nice, rather luxurious inventory considering she's married to a small town doctor in Kingston. It's not like a hub like Albany or New York City was. This is the coat I was mentioning that there was a little bit better picture of. He has a buff coat, and that's, he would have gone riding with it, and it had lacing going up it. So whether it was more like this one or this one, not quite sure, but it would have been a rather fancy, expensive coat. So you can actually see where he's from. So Amsterdam and everything's up this way, and he's all the way from down here near Cologne. And one of the things that turns up in his inventory are suspenders. And this is a little unusual. Anyone want to guess why? This is it was interesting to finally figure out why they have the band across the chest. Anyone want to guess?
Keep them from standing off your shoulder.
Good point. She said it's keeping them from sliding off their shoulders. That's probably one of the major reasons. In the 1570s, this is actually where this picture is taken from, there was a guild book produced, and people had started producing suspenders. The problem is in Germany, or the provinces of Germany, everything had to be is designated to a specific guild, and then they got a monopoly on it. And it wasn't the girdle makers, the belt makers that won it. It was the horse harness people that won it, the reins makers. So it's probably because they were making it in the same fashion as the way that they were making the horse straps around. Yeah.
So was this suspenders made of resin then?
Yeah, yeah. This is a later one. This is a much later one over here, but it was the only one I could find in color. So this is actually like I think mid 18th century, early 18th century. His was probably fabric of some sort, and it's probably backed with like a linen or something like that. But you can see them; they have the same outfit on, just one has the suspenders.
In Germany today, the lederhosen still have those.
That's it. It's exactly where they come from. Yes, it's that. Yes. The Dutch do have them. They're just not like widespread, but you can actually see them in a few early Dutch images too. So I often tell reenactors that if you're portraying a continental person or someone from New York, you can go for it. But if you're in New England, you got to find another way to hold up those bridges. You know? I kind of imagine this couple something like this sometimes. You can find a lot of these paintings, and almost always the guy is portrayed in slightly older fashion than the girl. But you can kind of see how her bodice is not well supported. She can actually bend a little bit in there. There's actually other images where you actually see a roll or two. And you can kind of see they don't come up very high. And it's just, it was just normal. I have not found a single reference to, a lot of times we try to portray something as being meant to be, sorry for saying it, but sexy. And I almost never see that as a purpose in their clothing when referenced. It almost always has to do with showing off their wealth in the sense that I worked hard for this, and now look at me, I made it. That's usually the intention. The only time I found anything that was intended to be something a little bit more to be alluring and like literally said if that was the purpose when a lady's underpants came in yellow. Does anyone want to guess why? It meant that not only am I fully covered, honey, and you got to work a little harder, but the yellow means how dedicated she is to him. She finds him alluring, so she's put on her yellow underpants just for him. They have a mind of their own back then. I don't know if we'll be able to receive this video on here.
Can you go back again?
Oh, yeah.
The painting on the right-hand side,
That's
her, yeah, her skirt looks half.
Oh, that's changeable silk.
Okay, I want to.
So what happens is when she's angled one way, it'll look one color, and when she's angled another, it'll look another. And they do that by having, when they weave, one string going this way will be one color, and the one going this way will be another. You can actually kind of see right here, she has a pocket in her petticoat. It's because they're tied to the side, where the guys were tying to the front. And you can actually see how it's coming down, not because it was like cut like with a swoop, it actually comes across this way and then would have literally just been opened down the front. So this one on this side is French, and these are Dutch. That's a Dutch doll. And you can't see it well. There's some other images. This is mid-century, and she's moved towards a very conical, like a cone-shaped bodice. And the Dutch don't get there. This is 1690s. So it takes them about 30 years to finally move towards that cone shape, and that becomes the standard in the 18th century. So they were moving at different, kind of different rates. And it's funny because the French, the average person in France was actually not a wealthy person, but it was fashionable to wear this bodice. And they did, as you can see, it's exposed, and that's normal. You could wear it over your linen undershirt, a knit or some sort of fabric, like shirt, undershirt, like a t-shirt, and then your bodice over that. That's normal. You can see this is an orphanage, and these are the helping hands at the orphanage. And they both have their bodices on. This is a part of the French painting. And you can kind of see, because of her shape, how she's got that triangle, she's probably wearing one of these underneath there. And it's not unusual for French painting teams to show people, like you're perceived as poor when you can't even patch your own clothing. And this happens in the Netherlands too. But proportionally, I think it's 64% of people in the Netherlands were middle class. So it was pretty high, yeah. It was pretty high. The milkmaids in the Netherlands were the highest paid milkman or milkwoman in all of Europe.
Do you have any theory as to why there was a large middle class?
Yeah, because there was no king ruling over them.
There was no what?
King. They threw off their Spanish rulers in 1581, and then they ruled themselves. So they could actually pay a fairer wage because they wanted to keep their trained employees. It took a lot of time to train an employee back then, and so they kept them by paying them a little bit better. It was also their religion, the way that their religion worked was you could look at what the average person ate each week, which would usually include a little bit of meat, but cheeses, salad, butter, and also like a stew. And that was really popular. And so if you were average, you ate that. If you were lower income, you ate that. And if you were wealthy, you still ate that. And you ate that on a regular basis because what you're saying is I know better. And so there was this emphasis to kind of be what the people called the good man, the good person. The Dutch had the idea that the average person was the ideal, and you were always working towards an ideal, if that makes sense. Yeah. It didn't mean they didn't show off with silk underpants, but they just, kept it tucked in.
But they sound more democratic in that sense.
For the 70s, a group of people coming off the Middle Ages, yes, I would definitely say that, yeah. I mean, because, this is a French painting also. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what French children would look like. Because this is about the age when the Imbrochs died. This is how big their children were. There was a little one, I think, that was 1 year old, another one that was like probably a preschooler, one that was about 7, 8 years old. One of the things that's a little different about the French is it's almost identical clothing. Her cap's a little different. It's like a rounder and flatter in the back, but overall it's very similar clothing. So Rachel had something kind of interesting. This too would have had 2 knives in it, and down here 2 silver knives in a tube. She would have used those for eating. She would have hung them off of a girdle. These are a little bit later. We start turning, with a fork, start turning up, like I think the earliest I've seen is like 1670s. They're eating with a fork and a knife, but before that it's 2 knives. And I think part of the reason why they did this was eating salad with salad dressing became very popular with the Dutch. It was like a thing. When Stuyvesant is sent to Krakow because the English invaded, he writes back in a letter, "Please send lettuce." And I'm thinking, here's this like really tough guy who's asking for carrots and lettuce and parsley too, so he can have his salad. Something that's kind of interesting and a little different, but speaking of these children, the Netherlands and New York, we can't know what the birth rate is, really, like how many are surviving compared to how many don't. But the diets must have been so good because there are so many live births of twins and triplets. And even some of the slaves are giving birth to twins and triplets. So it kind of speaks to their diet being exceedingly healthy, because even nowadays, multiples can be a little dangerous. So I left this to the end. This is a little bit of a nice surprise to see in Imbroch's inventory. They're living in Kingston. He's a doctor. He also, I think, sold books. He had like 60 children's books of ABC books, just ABC books. And so she probably was helping with that. And they had some clothing in there. Wild, you can kind of interpret that as like wild lang, a person of nature. That's how the Dutch referred to them. When the Dutch were upset, they referred to Native Americans as savages and barbarians, but in general, they just simply referred to them kind of like wild or wildlings. And in the original, sometimes you see Goertje translated, early translations, as the petticoat that goes over the shoulders, and it's not. It's actually either a small petticoat women will wear, shorter than the other ones, or it's a child's petticoat, depending on where it's located in the inventory. And this gets translated as dress. So it's one child's dress or Goertje. It's probably, I'm not quite sure. I was thinking that it might be the lower skirt that Native Americans wore, because they didn't always wear things on the top. But that would need further research. This word comes up twice in the inventory, and it's spelled differently both times. They translated it as hat in both instances. But this inventory, like a lot of Dutch ones, are very consistent in their spelling from beginning to end. They usually, if they spell something one way in the beginning, it'll be spelled the same way later. So I honestly think that this is actually not a hat, but another garment Native Americans wore, which is, it's like a coat with a hood. They call them Hudson Bay coats. They originally come from, I believe, the French, and then the Native Americans put a spin on it, and then it gets adopted. And trade between Canada and Ontario coming down this way is very heavy. There's a lot of trade coming back and forth. So it's very likely a hooded coat. And in the notas, I actually recently submitted a study to the William and Mary Journal, and I'm editing it now. And notas, I was thrilled to see that in here. And we don't have enough time here, but it's a basket, but it's not just any basket. Has anyone heard of wampum belts?
Yes.
Okay, this is really cool. So wampum belts are something more of the Iroquois used, the Senecas and through there. The Algonquins had their own system. They had the Siwan, they called it Siwan beads. They would put them on a string. You can get them as a phantom long, which is an arm length. Okay, and they used to pick the largest guy in their tribe to do the measurements, of course, when dealing with the Dutch. But what happened is the Algonquins realized it's actually, if you measure in a cup or a gallon or a liter, 1 notas is roughly a bushel size. And they go up 3 bushel sizes, 6 bushel sizes. And that's how they were measuring their corn or their beans or dried fish. And then along came the Dutch. And they said, you know, we also measure our beads in this, but you know what? What if we create a line of credit? And we use 1 bushel of the beads, and they would take out lines of credit with the Dutch. And it's probably the earliest, one of the earliest examples of any sort of creation of lines of credit, like a credit card that they were using on. So it's rather interesting. In fact, it, just like the tulip fever, it actually sparks this, this, I don't even know what to call it. The Dutch go crazy for this. And they start turning up in all the inventories. And it gets to the point where one of the wealthiest men in Albany, one of the Native Americans comes in and he just buys a couple cookies. He attacked him and took it because he wanted it. And then when the sheriff comes, he goes, ah. It's like he didn't know what came over him, but he wanted that basket of money from the Native American because they were so prized. Stealing becomes a problem. People go to the Native American tribes with brandy, and then when they go to sleep, they steal them. It gets really bad, but it's an interesting thing. But Native Americans are one of the first people to develop secured lines of credit. Like if you need to secure a line of credit for your house, they use your house as to secure the line. The Native Americans came up with that idea. So. These Native American, they call them bunkers. They're probably boxes. Native Americans would make boxes not only out of woven material, but also birch bark, and they would bend the birch bark around, and so that's probably what these are. So these are just some guidelines. Do we have any reenactors in the room? No? Okay. We have some historic site people though. When thinking about fashions for this time, if you see paintings from this era, it's way too early. I have not found, other than the Spanish petticoat, I have not found any Spanish clothing. So you can't use paintings from that era, even though we do have Dutch people starting to show up by then. Anything, when you're looking at paintings, if you see French paintings, Italians, or German, it's all fair game. You can use outfits from there, use them as references. 30s do show up in later inventories, including Ruffs and the Villager. Guys that tend to be a little bit more updated in their fashions, they also tend to have fewer clothes to update also, on average. So this is interesting. We often sometimes hear people in their 50s and 60s should be a decade or two behind. That's not true for New York and New England. You should have clothes that are updated for holidays, but maybe a little bit more reserved for church kind of thing. And there would be work clothes. Eastern clothing. In the 1640s, there's a few times we see Turkish robes being sold at auction. So those are starting to trickle in. In 1641, the first kimonos are shipped from Japan to the Netherlands, and a couple decades later, they start showing up here. We don't get into that only because they're like whole talks on their own.
Now, were the women starting to use perfume by this time? Was there any?
I have not seen perfume. I haven't seen it. Just the cosmetics are the only ones, and I've only seen them in Rachel's inventory so far. Any questions? Go ahead.
Getting back to the colors, where did they get the brilliant red from?
It is I think it's pronounced colonial. Yeah, it's the bug that they're crushing.
Oh.
They have that in, I have it in one of the inventories has it. The inventories have had the cochineal, I think that's on a shipping inventory. There's indigo, there's a lot of indigo. And I saw dyewood in there. Most of it though is getting shipped back out to the Netherlands, to their clothing factories though.
Coming from where? I'm sorry, did you say that?
What they do, the Dutch do is with their ships, they do this big circle. So they'll come down into the Caribbean. So if they picked up stuff in the east, they'll come that way, then they'll come down into the Caribbean, and then they come up the coast. And sometimes when they come up the coast, they'll switch to, if it's during the New York era, they'll switch it to a yacht and pop a French flag or something on there so the English don't know the Dutch are coming. And then they ship